Spanish Jews once constituted one of the largest and most prosperous Jewish communities in the world. This period ended definitively with the anti-Jewish riots of 1392 and Alhambra decree of 1492, as a result of which the majority of Jews in Spain converted to Catholicism and those remaining were forced into exile. An estimated 13,000 to 50,000 Jews live in Spain today, concentrated in the provinces of Malaga, Madrid and Barcelona, as well as having a historic presence in the autonomous cities of Ceuta and Melilla. A significant portion of these are Spanish-speaking Jews who returned to Spain after centuries of exile in northern Morocco during and after the Spanish protectorate. Ashkenazi Jews, primarily from Latin America but also of European origin, are also present in Spain. Early history. Some associate the country of Tarshish, as mentioned in the books of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Kings, Jonah and Romans, with a locale in southern Spain. In generally describing Tyre's empire from west to east, Tarshish is listed first, and in Jonah 1.3 it is the place to which Jonah sought to flee from the Lord. Evidently it represents the westernmost place to which one could sail. The link between Jews and Tarshish is clear. One might speculate that commerce conducted by Jewish emissaries, merchants, craftsmen, or other tradesmen among the Semitic Tyrian Phoenicians might have brought them to Tarshish. Although the notion of Tarshish as Spain is merely based on suggestive material, it leaves open the possibility of a very early, although perhaps limited, Jewish presence in the Iberian Peninsula. More substantial evidence of Jews in Spain comes from the Roman era. Although the spread of the Jews into Europe is most commonly associated with the Diaspora, which ensued from the Roman conquest of Judea, emigration from Eretz Yisrael into the greater Roman Mediterranean area antedated the destruction of Jerusalem at the hands of the Romans under Titus. In his Facta Edicta Memorabilia, Valerius Maximus makes reference to Jews and Chaldeans being expelled from Rome in 139 BCE for their corrupting influences. According to Josephus, King Agrippa attempted to discourage the Jews of Jerusalem from rebelling against Roman authority by reference to Jews throughout the Roman Empire, and elsewhere. Agrippa warned that the danger concerns not those Jews that dwell here only, but those of them which dwell in other cities also, for there is no people upon the habitable earth which do not have some portion of you among them, whom your enemies might slay, in case you go to war. The Provençal rabbi and scholar Rabbi Abraham ben David wrote in anno 1161, "A tradition exists with the community of Granada that they are from the inhabitants of Jerusalem, of the descendants of Judah and Benjamin, rather than from the villages, the towns in the outlying districts." Elsewhere, he writes about his maternal grandfather's family and how they came to Spain. When Titus prevailed over Jerusalem, his officer who was appointed over Hispania appeased him, requesting that he send to him captives made up of the nobles of Jerusalem, and so he sent a few of them to him, and there were amongst them those who made curtains and who were knowledgeable in the work of silk, and whose name was Barak, and they remained in Merida. Here, Rabbi Abraham ben David refers to the second influx of Jews into Spain, shortly after the destruction of Israel's Second Temple. The earliest mention of Spain is, allegedly, found in Obadiah chapter 1 verse 20, and the exiles of this host of the sons of Israel who are among the Canaanites as far as Sarfat, and the exiles of Jerusalem who are in Sepharad, will possess the cities of the south. while the medieval lexicographer David Ben Abraham al-Alfarsi identifies Safat with the city of Safen. The word Sephrad in the same verse has been translated by the 1st century rabbinic scholar Jonathan ben Uziel as a Spamia, based on a later teaching in the Compendium of Jewish Oral Laws compiled by Rabbi Judah Hanasi in 189 CE, known as the Mishnah. A Spamia is associated with a very far place, generally thought of as Hispania or Spain. In circa 960 CE, Isdai ibn Saprut, minister of trade in the court of the Caliph in Córdoba, wrote to Joseph, the king of Khazaria, saying, "The name of our land in which we dwell is called in the sacred tongue Sephrad, but in the language of the Arabs, the indwellers of the lands, Al-Andalus, the name of the capital of the kingdom, Córdoba." According to Rabbi David Kimchi, in his commentary on Obadiah chapter 1 verse 20, Safat and Sephrad, both, refer to the Jewish captivity expelled during the war with Titus and who went as far as the countries Almania, Escalona, France and Spain. The names Safat and Sephrad are explicitly mentioned by him as being France and Spain, respectively. Some scholars think that, in the case of the place name, Safat, which, as noted, was applied to the Jewish diaspora in France, the association with France was made only exegetically because of its similarity in spelling with the name by a reversal of its letters. Spanish Jew Moses de Leon mentions a tradition concerning the first Jewish exiles, saying that the vast majority of the first exiles driven away from the land of Israel during the Babylonian captivity refused to return, for they had seen that the second temple would be destroyed like the first. In yet another teaching, passed down later by Moses ben Machir in the 16th century, an explicit reference is made to the fact that Jews have lived in Spain since the destruction of the first temple. Now, I have heard that this phrase, Emet Wayesiv, was sent by the exiles who were driven away from Jerusalem and who were not with Ezra in Babylon, and that Ezra had sent inquiring after them, but they did not wish to go up, replying that since they were destined to go off again into exile a second time, and that the temple would once again be destroyed, why should we then double our anguish? It is best for us that we remain here in our place and to serve God. Now, I have heard that they are the people of Al-Atiyullah and those who are near to them. However, that they might not be thought of as wicked men and those who are lacking in fidelity, may God forbid. They wrote down for them this magnanimous praise, etc. Similarly, Gedalia ibn Jechir the Spaniard has written, in 252 Anno Mundi, the King Ferdinand and his wife Isabella made war with the Ishmaelites who were in Granada and took it, and while they returned they commanded the Jews in all of his kingdom that in but a short time they were to take leave from the countries, they being Castile, Navarre, Catalonia, Aragon, Granada and Sicily. Then the inhabitants of Al-Atiyullah answered that they were not present at the time when their Christ was put to death. Apparently, it was written upon a large stone in the city's street which some very ancient sovereign inscribed and testified that the Jews of Al-Atiyullah did not depart from that during the building of the second temple, and were not involved in putting to death Christ. Yet no apology was of any avail to them, neither until the rest of the Jews, till at length 600,000 souls had evacuated from there. Don Isaac Abrabanel, a prominent Jewish figure in Spain in the 15th century and one of the king's trusted courtiers who witnessed the expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492, informs his readers that the first Jews to reach Spain were brought by ship to Spain by a certain Pharos who was confederate with the king of Babylon when he laid siege to Jerusalem. This man was a Grecian by birth, but who had been given a kingdom in Spain. He became related by marriage to a certain Espan, the nephew of King Heracles, who also ruled over a kingdom in Spain. This Heracles later renounced his throne because of his preference for his native country in Greece, leaving his kingdom to his nephew, Espan, by whom the country of España derives its name. The Jewish exiles transported by the said Pharos were descended by lineage from Judah, Benjamin, Shimon and Levi, and were, according to Abrabanel, settled in 2 districts in southern Spain. 1. Andalusia, in the city of Lucena, a city so called by the Jewish exiles that had come there. The 2nd, in the country around Al-Aitula. Abrabanel says that the name Al-Aitula was given to the city by its first Jewish inhabitants, and surmises that the name may have meant, on account of the wandering from Jerusalem. He says, furthermore, that the original name of the city was Pirisval, so called by its early pagan inhabitants. He also writes that he found written in the ancient annals of Spanish history collected by the kings of Spain that the 50,000 Jewish households then residing in the cities throughout Spain were the descendants of men and women who were sent to Spain by the Roman emperor and who had formerly been subjected to him, and whom Titus had originally exiled from places in or around Jerusalem. The 2 Jewish exiles joined together and became one. Hispania came under Roman control with the fall of Carthage after the Second Punic War. Exactly how soon after this time Jews made their way onto the scene is a matter of speculation. It is within the realm of possibility that they went there under the Romans as free men to take advantage of its rich resources and build enterprises there. These early arrivals would have been joined by those who had been enslaved by the Romans under Vespasian and Titus, and dispersed to the extreme west during the period of the Jewish-Roman War, and especially after the defeat of Judea in 70. The Jewish historian, Josephus, confirms that as early as 90 CE there was already a Jewish diaspora living in Europe, made up of the 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin. Thus, he writes in his Antiquities, there are but 2 tribes in Asia and Europe subject to the Romans, while the 10 tribes are beyond Euphrates till now and are an immense multitude. Quote, one estimate places the number carried off to Spain at 80,000. Subsequent immigrations came into the area along both the northern African and southern European sides of the Mediterranean. Among the earliest records which may refer specifically to Jews in Spain during the Roman period is Paul's letter to the Romans. Many have taken Paul's intention to go to Spain to minister the gospel to indicate the presence of Jewish communities there, as has Herod's banishment to Spain by Caesar in 39. From a slightly later period, Midrash Rabbah and Peshiktah Rav Kahana both make mention of the Jewish diaspora in Spain and their eventual return. Perhaps the most substantial of early references of the several decrees of the Council of Elvira, convened in the early 4th century, which address proper Christian behavior with regard to the Jews of Spain, notably forbidding marriage between Jews and Christians. Of material evidence of early Iberian Jewry, representing a particularly early presence, is a signet ring found at Cadiz, dating from the 8th-7th century BCE. The inscription on the ring, generally accepted as Phoenician, has been interpreted by a few scholars to be Paleo-Hebraic. Among the early Spanish items of more reliably Jewish origins is an amphora which is at least as old as the 1st century. Although this vessel is not from the Spanish mainland, the imprint upon it of 2 Hebrew characters attests to Jewish contact. either direct or indirect, with the area at this time. Two trilingual Jewish inscriptions from Tarragona and Tortosa have been variously dated from the 2nd century BCE to the 6th century. There is also the tombstone inscription from Adra of a Jewish girl named Salmonula, which dates to the early 3rd century. Thus, while there are limited material and literary indications for Jewish contact with Spain from a very early period, more definitive and substantial data begins with the 3rd century. Data from this period suggest a well-established community, whose foundations must have been laid sometime earlier. It is likely that these communities originated several generations earlier in the aftermath of the conquest of Judea, and possible that they originated much earlier. As citizens of the Roman Empire, the Jews of Spain engaged in a variety of occupations, including agriculture. Until the adoption of Christianity, Jews had close relations with non-Jewish populations, and played an active role in the social and economic life of the province. The Edicts of the Synod of Elvira, although early examples of church-inspired anti-Semitism, provide evidence of Jews who were integrated enough into the greater community to cause alarm among some of the Council's 80 canonic decisions, all which pertain to Jews, served to maintain a separation between the two communities. It seems that by this time the presence of Jews was of greater concern to Catholic authorities than the presence of pagans. Canon 16, which prohibited marriage with Jews, was worded more strongly than Canon 15, which prohibited marriage with pagans. Canon 78 threatens those who commit adultery with Jews with ostracism. Canons 48 and 50 forbade the blessing of Christian crops by Jews and the sharing of meals with Jews, respectively. Visigoth rule, repression and forced conversions. Barbarian invasions brought most of the Iberian Peninsula under Visigothic rule by the early 5th century, other than in their contempt for Catholics, who reminded them of the Romans. The Visigoths did not generally take much of an interest in the religious creeds within their kingdom. It wasn't until 506, when Alaric II published his Breviarium Alaricianum, that a Visigothic king concerned himself with the Jews. The tides turned even more dramatically following the conversion of the Visigothic royal family under Ricard from Arianism to Catholicism in 587. In the desire to consolidate the realm under the new religion, the Visigoths adopted an aggressive policy concerning the Jews. As the king and the church acted in a single interest, the situation for the Jews deteriorated. Ricard approved the Third Council of Toledo's move in 589 to forcibly baptize the children of mixed marriages between Jews and Christians. Toledo III also forbade Jews from holding public office, from having intercourse with Christian women, and from performing circumcisions on slaves as Christians. Still, Ricard was not entirely successful in his campaigns. Not all Visigotharians had converted to Catholicism. The unconverted were true allies of the Jews, oppressed like themselves, and Jews received some protection from Arian bishops and the independent Visigothic nobility. While the policies of subsequent kings Leuva II, Witteric, and Gundamar are unknown to us, Sisbut embarked on Ricard's course with renewed vigor. Soon after upholding the edict of compulsory baptism for children of mixed marriages, Sisbut instituted what was to become an unfortunate recurring phenomenon in Spanish official policy, in issuing the first edicts against the Jews of expulsion from Spain. Following his 613 decree that the Jews either convert or be expelled, some fled to Central and North Africa, while as many as 90,000 converted. Many of these conversos, as did those of later periods, maintained their Jewish identities in secret. During the more tolerant reign of Suintila, however, most of the conversos returned to Judaism, and a number of the exiled returned to Spain. In 633, the Fourth Council of Toledo, while taking a stance in opposition to compulsory baptism, convened to address the problem of crypto-Judaism. It was decided that, if a professed Christian were determined to be a practicing Jew, his or her children were to be taken away to be raised in monasteries or trusted Christian households. The council further directed that all who had reverted to Judaism during the reign of Suintila had to return to Christianity. The trend toward intolerance continued with the ascent of Suintila. He directed the Sixth Council of Toledo to order that only Catholics could remain in the kingdom, and taking an unusual step further, Suintila excommunicated in advance any of his successors who did not act in accordance with his anti-Jewish edicts. Again, many converted while others chose exile. And yet the problem continued. The Eighth Council of Toledo in 653 again tackled the issue of Jews within the realm. Further measures at this time included the forbidding of all Jewish rites, and all converted Jews had to promise to put to death, either by burning or by stoning, any of the brethren known to have relapsed to Judaism. The council was aware that prior efforts had been frustrated by lack of compliance among authorities on the local level. Therefore, anyone, including nobles and clergy, found to have aided Jews in the practice of Judaism were to be punished by seizure of 1/4 of their property and excommunication. These efforts again proved unsuccessful. The Jewish population remained sufficiently sizable as to prompt Wamba to issue limited expulsion orders against them, and the reign of Urwag also seemed vexed by the issue. The 12th Council of Toledo again called for forced baptism, and, for those who disobeyed, seizure of property, corporal punishment, exile, and slavery. Jewish children over 7 years of age were taken from the parents and similarly dealt with in 694. Urwag also took measures to ensure that Catholic sympathizers would not be inclined to aid Jews in their efforts to subvert the council's rulings. Heavy fines awaited any nobles who acted in favor of the Jews. Members of the clergy who were remiss in enforcement were subject to a number of punishments. Edica, recognizing the wrongness of forced baptism, relaxed the pressure on the conversos, but kept it up on practicing Jews. Economic hardships included increased taxes and the forced sale at a fixed price of all property ever acquired from Christians. This effectively ended all agricultural activity for the Jews of Spain. Furthermore, Jews were not to engage in commerce with the Christians of the kingdom nor conduct business with Christians overseas. Edica's measures were upheld by the 16th Council of Toledo in 693. As demonstrated under the Catholic Visigoths, the trend was clearly one of increasing persecutions. The degree of complicity which the Jews had in the Islamic invasion in 711 is uncertain. Yet openly treated as enemies in the country in which they had resided for generations, it would be no surprise for them to have appealed to the Moors to the south, quite tolerant in comparison to the Visigoths, for aid. In any case, in 694 they were accused of conspiring with the Muslims across the Mediterranean. Declared traitors, the Jews, including baptized ones, found the property confiscated and themselves enslaved. This decree exempted only the converts who dwelt in the mountain passes of Septimania, who were necessarily for the kingdom's protection. The Jews of Spain had been utterly embittered and alienated by Catholic rule by the time of the Muslim invasion. To them, the Moors were perceived as, and indeed were, a liberating force. Wherever they went, the Muslims were greeted by Jews eager to aid them in administering the country. In many conquered towns the garrison was left in the hands of the Jews before the Muslims proceeded further north. Thus was initiated the period that became known as the Golden Age for Spanish Jews. The Eastern Roman Empire sent its navy on numerous occasions at the end of the 7th and beginning of the 8th centuries to try and instill uprisings in the Jewish and Christian Roman populations in Spain and Gaul against Visigoth and Frankish rule, which was also aimed at halting the expansion of Muslim Arabs in the Roman world. In AD 694, at the Council of Toledo, Jews were condemned to slavery by the Visigoths because of a plot to revolt against them encouraged by the Eastern Roman Empire and Romans still residing in Spain.